Sit down and be quiet, my brother sneered, sliding a cheap folding chair toward me in front of 50 high-profile guests. You're embarrassing us. You have no idea who you're even sitting with. He laughed, soaking in the quiet giggles of his wealthy friends as I smoothed down my simple dress. For years, my family treated me like the quiet disappointment who had nothing to offer. But as I reached for my glass of water, an older man at the main head table suddenly froze mid-conversation. He stared directly at my face, his hands trembling as he pulled out his phone, rapidly tapping the screen before turning it toward the rest of the room. He gasped, his voice ringing out over the quiet dining hall. Wait? Is that really you? My brother's smug smirk instantly withered, his face turning pale as every single eye in the room shifted to me. My name is Clara Thompson. I'm 27 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet shadow in my family's oversized spotlight. Tonight was supposed to be about my older brother, Julian. He had spent months orchestrating this grand high-stakes dinner at an upscale steakhouse in downtown Chicago, desperate to land a massive logistics contract. The room was dripping with wealth: polished mahogany tables, glittering crystal chandeliers, and guest list full of city power brokers, investors, and high-ranking military donors. I almost didn't come. I've always kept a low profile, preferring to work behind the scenes in my career, while Julian loved playing the high-flying executive. But our mother begged me to attend, claiming we needed to support family. So I dressed in a modest navy outfit, smoothed down my simple dress, and walked through the brass doors. The moment Julian saw me, his smile vanished. Instead of greeting me, he grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back corner of the private dining room, far away from the head table where all the influential figures were gathered. What are you wearing, Clara? He hissed under his breath, sliding a cheap folding chair toward me near the service kitchen. This is a serious business dinner, not a family casual night. You're embarrassing us. You have no idea who you're even sitting with, so just stay out of the way. A few of his wealthy friends overheard and snickered into their wine glasses. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation in my cheeks, but I simply sat down, smoothed my skirt, and remained calm. Julian thought I was just a quiet disappointment with nothing to offer. He had no idea what was about to happen. Growing up, Julian was always the golden child. He had a gift for taking credit for everyone else's work, turning every minor achievement into a grand performance. While he spent his 20s hopping between flashy startups and collecting inflated job titles, I took a very different path. Right after college, I dropped out of the family social circle to focus on my career. Because I rarely talked about my job and worked long hours away from home, my family assumed I was just doing low-level remote administrative work, barely scraping by. Julian never let me forget it. At every holiday dinner, he'd find subtle ways to parade his income while offering condescending advice on how I should build some actual ambition. I never bothered to correct him. I preferred keeping my head down and letting my results speak for themselves. Sitting in the back corner of the restaurant, watching Julian parade around the head table like a king, felt like a scene from my entire life on loop. He was currently standing near the front of the room, loudly boasting about his company's grand expansion plans to a group of potential investors and local military representatives. Success isn't for everyone, Julian declared with a booming laugh, glancing over at my back table as if pointing out a cautionary tale. Some people are content with mediocrity. But in my line of work, only true leaders survive. The guests around him laughed, throwing pitying glances toward my corner. A few of Julian's close associates openly snickered, clearly primed by Julian's past stories about his unambitious, quiet sister. I took a slow sip of my water, watching him weave his exaggerated stories. Julian was riding high, entirely convinced that no one in this room could ever challenge him. As the evening progressed, the discussion at the main table turned toward the specifics of the multi-million-dollar defense logistics contract Julian was desperately chasing. Julian was holding court, painting a picture of his company's grand capabilities, but it quickly became clear to me that he was severely out of his depth. He was making promises about supply chain routes and security protocols that were not only unrealistic, but legally impossible under current federal regulations. An older gentleman sitting near the center of the head table, a sharp-eyed man in a dark suit with a subtle military pin on his lapel, frowned slightly. He leaned forward, questioning Julian on how his firm planned to handle the strict compliance audits required for high-security transit. Julian stammered for a split second, trying to gloss over the question with vague corporate buzzwords. Sensing an opportunity to save the deal from collapsing right then and there, I spoke up from my corner table. I kept my voice calm, even, and clear enough to carry across the quiet dining area. The compliance issues can easily be addressed by integrating the standardized Department of Defense oversight protocol, I said smoothly. It bypasses the third-party bottleneck entirely. The entire room went silent. Julian's face flushed a deep, angry red. He spun toward me, his eyes flaring with humiliation that his unambitious sister dared to speak in front of his elite guests. "Sit down and be quiet," my brother sneered, sliding a cheap folding chair toward me in front of 50 high-profile guests. "You're embarrassing us. You have no idea who you're even sitting with." He laughed dismissively, but as I reached for my glass of water, the sharp-eyed man at the head table suddenly froze mid-sentence, his gaze locked entirely on me. The guest of honor at the main table was General Vance, a heavily decorated officer and key advisor overseeing the multi-million-dollar government defense contract. He paid no attention to Julian's desperate attempts to laugh off my comment. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on my face, zooming past the surrounding crowd as if he were trying to match a face from a briefing file. He slowly pulled out his sleek black smartphone, his fingers tapping the screen with rapid, precise urgency. The quiet murmur of the dining room began to fade as guest after guest noticed the general's sudden, intense shift in demeanor. Julian stood frozen, his confident smile wavering into a look of sheer confusion. General Vance scrolled down his screen, paused, and looked back up at me. His hands were visibly trembling as he cross-referenced the official government database profile on his phone with the woman sitting on a cheap folding chair in the back corner of the room. He let out an audible breath, a look of profound realization sweeping across his weathered face. He turned the screen slightly toward the local business leaders sitting beside him, his voice ringing out clearly over the quiet dining hall. "Wait? Is that really you?" Julian chuckled nervously, trying to regain control of the room. "General Vance, please ignore her. That's just my younger sister Clara. She doesn't work in our industry. She's just a remote administrative worker. She has no idea how high-level defense contracts actually operate." General Vance stood up abruptly, scraping his chair against the hardwood floor. He didn't even look at Julian. "Quiet, Julian," General Vance snapped, his commanding tone cutting through the air like a blade. He looked back at me, his voice carrying deep authority and immense respect. "You're talking about Director Clara Thompson. She's the Chief Logistics Strategist for the Department of Defense's Oversight Division. In fact, she's the primary official assigned to review, authorize, or reject your entire contract application." Julian's smug smirk instantly withered, his face turning ghostly pale as every single eye in the room shifted directly to me. The silence in the dining hall was deafening. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet. Julian stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to process what General Vance had just said. The very sister he had shoved into the back corner, the one he had spent years painting as an unambitious failure, was the single most powerful person in the room regarding his financial future. General Vance stepped away from the head table and walked deliberately toward my small folding chair in the back. The other high-profile investors and corporate executives watched in awe, leaning out of their seats to catch every second of the unfolding drama. "Director Thompson," General Vance said, stopping in front of me and extending his hand with deep formal respect. "I had no idea you would be joining us tonight. Had I known, I would have insisted you take the seat at the head of the table where you belong." I stood up slowly, smoothing down my dress, and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, General Vance. I prefer to keep a low profile outside of official military briefings." Julian stumbled over his words, trying desperately to recover. "Clara, Director? Wait, there has to be a mistake. You work a remote job. Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never asked, Julian," I replied calmly, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "You were always too busy using me as a punchline to boost your own ego." General Vance turned icy, critical gaze onto my brother. "Julian, your firm submitted a bid for a $20 million defense logistics contract. Director Thompson was assigned to conduct the final integrity and leadership audit on your company. And frankly, seeing how you treat key stakeholders, and your own family, raises severe questions about your character and judgment." The room erupted into quiet, shocked whispers. The investors who had spent the entire evening laughing at Julian's jokes were now staring at him with undisguised disdain. In less than 2 minutes, the entire power dynamic had completely inverted. As the guest list quickly disbanded and investors made hasty excuses to leave, Julian sprinted after me down the hallway near the restaurant's exit. The swagger and arrogance he had worn all evening were completely gone, replaced by absolute panic. His face was flushed and sweat glistened on his forehead. "Clara. Wait please," he begged, grabbing my arm before catching himself and pulling his hand back nervously. "You have to help me fix this. Please tell General Vance it was just a misunderstanding. Tell him we were just joking around. If I lose this contract, the company goes under. My entire life is built on this deal." I stopped, turning slowly to look at my older brother. For 27 years, I had watched him step on people, claim credit for work he never did, and treat me like trash just to make himself feel superior. "It wasn't a joke, Julian," I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. "You meant every single word you said in there. You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone because you thought I was beneath you." "I was just trying to look impressive to the investors," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I'm your brother, Clara. Family is supposed to support each other. Family doesn't shove each other into corners and treat them like embarrassments," I replied softly. "You built your entire business on smoke, mirrors, and arrogance, Julian. I'm not going to lie or alter an official Department of Defense audit to save you from your own terrible behavior. Leadership requires integrity, something you clearly lack." Without waiting for his response, I turned my back on him. By the time I reached the valet stand, Julian's main investors had already emailed his board to pull their funding. Walking out into the cool evening air, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. I didn't feel smug or vengeful as I waited for my car. I simply felt profound peace. For almost 3 decades, I had allowed my family's narrow opinions to define my place among them, silently accepting the role of the quiet, underwhelming sister just to keep the peace. But real strength doesn't need to shout, boast, or belittle others to prove its worth. Julian's company collapsed within 2 months following the failed audit and the swift departure of his financial backers. It was a harsh lesson for him, but a necessary one. He was forced to rebuild his career from the ground up, this time without the safety net of false bravado or family cover-ups. As for me, my life continued forward. I kept my head down, continued leading high-level strategy for the department, and surrounded myself only with people who valued integrity over illusion. My mother eventually called to apologize, admitting that the family had taken my quiet nature for granted for far too long. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that you should never let someone else's arrogance dictate your self-worth. You don't need to make a scene or scream to earn respect. You just need to work hard, stay grounded, and let your results do the talking. Because when the truth finally comes to light, the loudest person in the room is often the first one left with nothing to say. Simple, honest, and free, that is true power.